Hello, this is Shmuel Moshe, and you are listening to the Weekly Parashahcast, Season 3, the show where I read the Tanakh and provide my own interpretations of what I think it all means. This week's episode, we're going to be reading the Torah portion for Lech Lecha. This takes place in the book of Genesis, and we're going to quickly recap all of the different parts of the story, and then jump on in with some interpretations of something that caught my eye. So, that's the structure for Season 3. Little bits and pieces. You can catch the full reading of the portion and my first impressions of it in Season 1, Episode 3 for the Weekly Parashahcast. For this episode, you could follow along on any preferred translation you wish. I'll be jumping around depending on which ones I have access to for the sake of reading through my interpretation. This week, as I mentioned before, is Lech Lecha. So, to quickly break down the details and contents of this portion, it begins in chapter 12 of Genesis. Abram, or Avram, he hears the voice of God telling him to go forth, and he takes his nephew, his wife, and he marches off to a desirable land that is being promised to him and shown to him. So they leave Haran, and they go to Egypt. In Egypt, they deal with the misunderstanding. Basically, his wife Sarai is very beautiful. He doesn't want her to be taken away, so he tells her, "Tell them that you're my sister. That way they won't murder me." It works. He gets elevated and given all sorts of wonders and treatments, and then the Pharaoh finds out because of a vision and a premonition and misfortune, and tells him, "What were you trying to pull here? Get out of here and take your wife with you. I don't want to get caught up in adultery." So with that in mind, they leave. Now from there, after taking their departure from Egypt, they move along, and we can assume that at this point, this is also, while they were in Egypt, probably where Sarai picked up the maidservant Hagar, since she is an Egyptian woman, but we'll get more into that. Now, at a certain point, after parting ways in Egypt, there is a misunderstanding, or a quarrel that breaks out between Lot, the nephew of Abram, his servants, and Abram's servants, over the men who are taking care of the cattle. Rather than them having any bad blood, Abram says, "My nephew, I don't want you and I to have any issues, so why don't you take a look left or right, and whichever one you pick, I'll go the other way. We'll part in peace." Lot sees a beautiful land, which is toward the direction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he says, "Yeah, I'll take that open, beautiful field, and you go the other way." So he and his uncle part ways, leaving us with Abram. Now, shortly after this, it happens that Lot is taken as part of the captives of a war that takes place between the different kings of several nations. Sodom and Gomorrah are among those involved, if I recall correctly. And so Abraham rescues Lot with the help of God, him and his army of men, of servants from his home. They liberate Lot and all of the different victims of this war who lost. And following so, there is an offering made to God and a lovely commemoration. Abram is offered spoils of war, and he says, "I will not be taking any of those, lest anybody say that they made me wealthy. It will be God who does so." There's also a prophet of God who is there, so that's very interesting that Abram is not the only person who serves the God of Abraham. There are others out there, this priest of the Most High. So from here, after doing so, he parts ways and leaves, of course, a portion for his allies who helped to take from the bounty. But after this, we get into the covenant. Abram is given a covenant. God tells him that you can count on him. And Abram says, "Well, my Lord, I don't have a son, so what will you give to me? Will my inheritance go to the son of my servant? Will it go to my servant rather than to my own seed?" And God tells him, no. You will have a child, and you will also receive this land. Wonderful. But Abram asks, "How will I know? What will be the sign?" And so he is told, "Look into the stars, see all those stars, your seed will be as numerous as those." Now, Abram at this point is very old. He's already an old man. Nevertheless, God tells him, when he asks, "How will I know that I'll inherit it?" God tells him to bring him an offering of goats, cow, ram, turtle dove, and bird. The animals are parted, except for the birds. Abram fends off the wild creatures that want to take the offering, and then he falls asleep, has a vision, finds out about the future inhabitation of Egypt where the Israelites will be oppressed, but nevertheless they will ultimately be liberated and take the spoils with them as they go. Abram himself will not be there to see it. All the same, the land here will be given to someone else for a time. Specifically, the iniquities of the current inhabitants are not finished. Going on from here, Sarai, the wife of Abram, has not had a child yet, and so she tells Abram, take my servant, and maybe she'll give you a child. Abram obeys. Hagar, the servant from Egypt, gets pregnant, and Ishmael is born. Now, unfortunately, this causes a problem between Sarai and Hagar. The servant Hagar becomes very proud and haughty and no longer fears Sarai because she's the one who gave Abram a child. And this causes Sarai to be greatly aggrieved, and so she attacks the slave girl after telling Abram, this is all your fault. Look what happened. And Abram says, look, you told me to take her, I took her. But let you go ahead and do whatever you want with her, okay? It's up to you, your call. So, in response, she attacks Hagar. Hagar runs away, and as she's on the run, she receives a vision that tells her that her son will be called Ishmael. He will be blessed, and he will have many, many, many descendants. Hagar is told this, you will be the mother of many. As for Ishmael, he will be a wild donkey of a man. Everyone's hand will be against him, and he against everyone. He will dwell away from all his brothers. At this point, she recognizes God, and they part ways. 86 years old is how Abram was when Ishmael was born. Circumcision happens some 13 years later. The covenant of the circumcision, this is done to Abraham when he's 99 and Ishmael is 13. Now, God tells Abraham very clearly, and this is what we're going to focus on for today's episode, the importance of the circumcision. Abram is told, you have basically been very faithful to me. Walk in my ways, and you will be blameless. Continually walk before me, you will be blameless. God wants to form a covenant and multiply Abraham. So Abram falls on his face. He's very, very humble here. God tells him, you will be the father of nations. Your name will no longer be Abram. It will be Abraham. Avraham. Likewise, the same will happen to his wife, Sarah. Sarai will become Sarah. Additionally, the most important thing here, you must be certain to circumcise every male, every son, all the men, whether they're slaves, purchased, or your own, they must be circumcised in order to receive the covenant. This is extremely important. The circumcision is critical in order to have this received benefit. That is the covenant between Abraham and the descendants of Abraham. Ishmael receives a circumcision as well, so it is not to say that he is without his circumcision. This is very important for both of them. As for Sarah, she will have a child as well of her own. This one will be Abraham's second son, Sarah's first. Well, technically, I should say it's Abraham's first son, Abram's second son. The distinction being, before he was Abraham, he had a son, and then after he was Abraham, he will have a son. But is he the same person before and after? We'll be talking about that in a little bit. In conclusion, Ishmael and all his slaves, everybody that's in Abraham's house, they get circumcised. Great. Cool. Everything's settled. Circumcision is the law. Those who don't get circumcised will be cut off from the people. They will be broken from the covenant. So they must be circumcised. Cannot stress how important this was. So we're talking about the circumcision today. The covenant itself, the symbol of the covenant. This is a covenant sealed in flesh. This is a marking on the body. This is also done, for those who don't know, circumcision is done on the male's sexual organ, right? So, unlike a natural-born person, one who is circumcised does not have a foreskin. This is not particularly new material to most people, but I'm going to be talking about this specifically, as well as the legacy of Abram versus Abraham. So once again, the circumcision is the mark of the covenant. This is what will separate those who are in the covenant and those who are not. Those who do not get that proper circumcision on the 8th day, as it mentions, they will be cut off. So if you don't get the circumcision, you will be removed from the people. This is terribly important. The circumcision itself is a very contentious subject matter throughout civilization, particularly in the Western world now. There have always been, ever since even ancient times, circumcisions. This is not something exclusive to the Jews. It's not unique to the Jews or even modern history. According to Herodotus, in his histories, this is the Greek historian, circumcision was practiced in Egypt in those ancient days. This was not just a Hebrew thing. Circumcision was apparently very, very common. So that's very important to keep in mind.
So for all the people who vilify circumcision and make it out to be some sort of barbaric practice that is a Jewish thing, well, it's not a Jewish thing, though it is critical for Jews. It is the symbol of the Jewish people, their covenant. It's not unique to the Jews by any means. Once again, this was something that is apparently an ancient historical practice, one of the oldest, if not the oldest known forms of surgery that is performed in human history. But it has a significant meaning inside of the people Israel. So Abraham's circumcision, as well as the one that is given to Ishmael and his other servants that he has, well, not to say Ishmael's his servant, Ishmael's his son. His servants are circumcised also. Everybody who gets brought into Abraham's household will be circumcised. And Ishmael will surely also follow in these footsteps. So what does the circumcision mean? I've heard different descriptions and explanations of the significance of the circumcision. I'm going to provide a couple of notes here and also dictate why Ishmael is not the inheritor, but instead Isaac. It is not because Ishmael will be sent away, which is indeed a factor, but it's because of when he was born. Ishmael is the son of Abram. Isaac is the son of Abraham. Even though he's the same man, he is someone new with his new name. He has evolved, just like Jacob becomes Israel. Abram becomes Abraham. Why does this matter? Well, this matters a great deal because once he becomes Abraham, he is anointed with a new spiritual energy. That would imply that his seed, his descendants, will receive something special. Now, interestingly, it's worth noting here that Abraham understands this distinction because while God is telling him, yes, I'm going to bless you and your seed, there's a moment where Abraham says, oh, God, if only Ishmael could live before you. So right here, Abraham shows his care and his love for his firstborn son, and also making this point, Abraham recognizes that Ishmael is going to be left out. So because of this, God responds, I hear you, I have heard you. Ishmael will also be blessed. He will be the father of many nations. It's going to be great. So Abraham never lost track of his love for his son Ishmael. And when he becomes Abraham, that doesn't change. He still may be on a new spiritual level, but he loves his son Ishmael, and he always has. And these matters related to the conflict in the home have never not been a matter of strife for him, where he loves his son, regardless of the drama between the two mothers. So Abraham looked out for Ishmael even when it was no longer necessary. This is his love for Ishmael. He ensured that Ishmael would be blessed. There was also the concern about whether or not Sarah and he could conceive, but that's something they talk about. Let's talk more about the symbolism or the importance of this anointment. In ancient Persia, there are many, many stories about ascension to the throne. The Persians had numerous kings, and they were constantly at war with each other, backstabbing, courtroom intrigue, you name it. This was very commonplace in ancient Persia. When Darius the Great ascended to the throne, he was not of the line of Cyrus. Cyrus the Great had his own 2 sons, and then those sons were not... One of them was supposedly killed by his brother Cambyses. So Cambyses was the king. King Darius comes after Cambyses. After Cambyses is killed, they say he went mad. Whatever the case is, there's basically a coup d'etat after this, and Darius takes the throne. And at this point, he is now king. Darius already has children. But now that he has been anointed king, the children that are born henceforth are special. Even though he already had children, only after becoming the king of Persia would his children born thereafter be imbued with the royal, regal, spiritual power that is fit for the descendant of a king. So Darius's existing children were actually not given the same level of authority or respect by blood that the children that came after his royal ascension had. This is very similar, for comparison's sake, to the exact situation going on with Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael. After becoming Abraham, Abraham has become something of like a king in his own way. Well, he already had a son before then. His first son was before this time, and so just like Darius's children before and after becoming king, Abraham will have children before and after becoming Abraham. The child that came before being Abraham is going to be left out. Abraham sees this, recognizes this, and pleads, "Oh, if only Ishmael could have lived before you." Yes, I hear you. Ishmael will also be blessed. So Abraham looked out for his boy, also made sure his son was circumcised, and things go their own way. Now, another thing to consider about circumcision, what makes it special? Well, animals in the wild, this is something that's considered to be a distinction, is that a circumcised human is somehow stepping away from being an animal, because an animal is a natural creature in the wild. It has its foreskin, whereas a human can be circumcised and purify their sexual organ in this way through a spiritual practice, sealing the covenant in their flesh, as it is said. What does it mean? Well, if the man's member is circumcised, then it would go to reason that anything that passes through there would also be somehow blessed in some way. If the circumcision is a holy ritual and it brings with it a degree of holiness, then anything that passes through there and comes into contact there also is in contact with a degree of holiness. This is also why they say things like protect your Brit. They tell men, don't fool around. You have to protect that because it's a sacred covenant. Interestingly, there's also a point later on that we'll talk about in a couple of portions where Abraham sends his servant Eliezer to go find a wife for Isaac, his son. And when he tells him to do so, he has Eliezer swear an oath. And when he does so, Eliezer, it says, puts his hand on Abraham's thigh. Why there? Well, the thigh, as I once read in a description commentary, is awfully close to another part of the body that happens to be where the circumcision took place. So this is the holiest part of Abraham's flesh is down there. And so by swearing by that, Eliezer has basically sworn in the presence of a holy body part, if you will. So the significance of the circumcision is such. Additionally, those, as I mentioned, born from one who is circumcised do seem to inherit that spiritual value which was absent from Ishmael but present in Isaac. Not to say that Ishmael did anything wrong by being born, but he was born before the circumcision. So whatever spiritual inheritance would have been passed on was not passed on. And interestingly enough, this is almost like an inheritance property of you can receive this inheritance, but if you don't also get circumcised yourself, young man, the baby does not get circumcised, then they are cut off from this very spiritual covenant. This prevents them from being bound in the covenant of Abraham. So circumcision is the single most important of all the different traditions of the Israelites. Arguably number one, it is what defines the moment of Abraham's covenant and becomes one sealed in the flesh of all his descendants and those who are servants of his descendants. It cannot be that one is uncircumcised if they wish to walk in this way. And again, because sexual activity is something that is considered to be right on the border of animal behavior, giving some extra attention, respect, and sort of mindfulness around the act of sex or procreation by involving this very holy art or holy ritual, well, that changes the meaning of it altogether, because the man would then be blessing the woman in a different way, passing the blessing to the offspring. This is the inheritance of the tribes of Israel. And many times before, I've been in dilemma because modern interpretations suggest that Judaism is matrilineal, but I am more inclined to believe, once again, that it is patrilineal, that it follows the line of the father, and this is just another example of that, though there are many others, from rules allowing men to bring in war brides to who knows what. It follows the line of the man. And the circumcision is the linchpin of this particular detail. Moses himself, his life was in danger until his wife said, "Uh-oh, I better make sure our sons are circumcised because Moses didn't do it. He's been too focused on his job, and now this has caused Moses to get sick with a fatal illness." She circumcises the son, and suddenly Moses recovers. So the circumcision is more important even than rescuing the Israelites from the Egyptians. So is the level of importance for the circumcision, the Brit Milah. So that's really what I wanted to focus on today, the importance of that. And I mentioned before, but what passes through this part of the body is passing through a thing that has undergone a ritual of spiritual sanctity. So what comes out is special. It's holy in a different way than it would be if one wasn't circumcised. And so I also want to say this about circumcision. It's not something that should be done casually. It's not something that should just be casually done at the hospital. Baby is born. Doctor's like, all right, let's chop him up. No, don't do that. That is not cool. If you're not doing this for a ritual reason, if it's not something so sacred, leave your kids alone. Don't do this to your child. This is not some small thing to do. And the way that they do it in these hospitals, it's pretty horrific. And certainly there's nothing holy about strapping down a baby and the way they go about it. It is very much not what I would consider to be kosher versus what is a very sacred and spiritual event through a proper circumcision in accordance with the traditions. There are things beyond this. Even from here, we see that it's to be on the 8th day that the baby is circumcised. So there is not a case where the child should be circumcised right away. That's just crazy, at least relative to what is expected in the Torah. But I digress. That is the focus for today's topic, the importance of the circumcision, as well as the distinction between those born before Abram became Abraham and those who would be born after. There is a different spiritual level in Abraham's body that passes on to his descendants after Ishmael, because he becomes Abraham. And once again, Abraham has more than one child. He has more than just 2 children, in fact. After Isaac, he will go on to have many more descendants after Sarah. But the first inheritor is going to be Isaac. That's going to be his main child. All the other kids after that do not get the blessings. Ishmael likewise is sent away. It is said that he will dwell far from his brothers. That's what Hagar is told. And indeed that is the case, though as we will find out later, he and Isaac will reunite at some point, and they will do so seemingly in peace. That's all for this week's episode. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found it interesting. Once again, this was for Lech Lecha, about Abraham going out and following the word of God and seeking the Holy Land, Promised Land, and so on, his destiny awaiting him. Until next time, this is Shmuel Moshe with the Weekly Parashahcast Season 3 saying thanks for listening, and as always, Baruch Hashem.